Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 15, a deeper look into e-collar dog training. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. This is episode 15, a deeper look into e-collar dog training. Now, before we dive in, we want to thank you guys again so much for listening. We've gotten such crazy support in such a short amount of time, and I feel like I say this all the time, so I'm not going to harp on it too much, but thank you guys. We really, really appreciate it, and we're going to try our best to keep putting out great content for you. So with that in mind, we've got a very fun topic today, e-collar and dog training, and we know that that's a dicey one, so we've enlisted the help of our friend Shona to help us kind of, wade
Level
through
the playing field a little bit.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Dive in right when I need you. Okay, so we've got you can find us on Instagram. You can find me at UNTAMEDDOGCO. That's all one word. Brent is at CANISBEHAVIor, and Shona is at WEHODOGTRAINER. All one word. Now, I'm going to kick it over to Brent, and I think we're going to start out with what the public perception, what people think about e-collar these days. So over to you, man.
Yes, guys. Welcome back again to episode 15 about e-collar dog training. As Mariano mentioned, this is a really hot topic, especially in dog training. But the cool thing that we've seen is over the years, probably over the last 15 to 10 years, we started to see that e-collars are now becoming a more popular technique and tool used in dog training. And it's really great to see because, with the development of more sophisticated technology, definitely develop more sophisticated techniques. So what we start seeing applications and uses of the dog training or the tool in dog training to actually become more advanced. So e-collars over the years have kind of been used for off-leash work. And more recently, we started to see e-collar being used in the help of consistent dog management, off-leash management of animals, and also behavioral modification, which is really awesome. So we're super excited to talk about this. And again, I just want to welcome Shona Smith, who is a very young and up-and-coming dog trainer, very, very talented in her craft. We actually, funny enough, got to meet her on Instagram, just kind of watching her video. She showed up in my feed one day, and I got to, there's so many dog trainers online. It's really great to see someone who's really passionate, someone who actually is very technical and likes the work, someone who we see the results with the dogs and the puppies that she's training at any given time. You get to actually see those results. So she's not just a trainer that likes to harp, ideals. She's actually one putting in the work, learning the techniques. And, she's probably the first one to tell you, like, she's relatively new to the game, but honestly, she's further along than a couple of trainers that I've run into throughout the years. So welcome so much, Shona, for joining us. I really appreciate
it. Thank you. Thank you for all the kind words, Brent. That really means a lot. Yeah, it's really cool to be here, and I'm excited to talk about e-collars because I'm very passionate about them.
I love that. So let me go ahead and ask you a question real quick. What would you feel? What would you say, like, the public's perspective of e-collars are?
Currently, I do feel like the tide is shifting a bit, but I think most people have a pretty negative or at least unsure feeling about them, mostly because of they think it's going to be painful and hurt the dog. And so that makes a lot of sense. Like, I understand that. But I think anyone who has even a little bit of education about them or has seen like a video where they can see the dog's fine, and it's just a communication system, then those people tend to be like super on board and excited. Mm-hmm. So it really just depends. I think overall, though, it's still not totally positive. Mm-hmm. The public perception,
of course, and I think
that's my experience.
Yeah, and we see. I mean, we've done a deeper look into corrections. I think that was our last episode.
Yeah.
And so, like, there are some people that are even, a little weary about this idea of correction or anything that might be perceived as uncomfortable with dogs in general.
Right.
And so, that's always going to be the case because people are protective of their animals, right? The last thing we want to do is even have the perception of causing discomfort to our beloved pets. So we totally get it. Yeah. However, one thing that you brought up, or you kind of alluded to, was, the importance of educating people on these tools. And the whole purpose of this Deeper Look series is that's what we're going to do, right? In my opinion, a couple things that people are scared of this tool because there is no experience of it, right? And we see the same thing happen with like choke chains, prong collars, even slip leads. Like I've actually met people that hate slip leads in general, right? So across the board, pretty much if I don't have any experience with something or I don't understand it, I'm automatically going to judge it or put it down. And this is just the nature of loving dog owners, right? Because the last thing we want to do is feel we have to go down that route. What do you think, Mariano?
Yeah, I think, e-collar is a funny one because I think it's probably one of the most notorious tools that's most conflated with something else, like a taser, or, and I think that something that I've always found very interesting is the people who are most openly and like energetically against it tend to be other trainers. They're like pure positive trainers,
Right.
and they use words like, and I try to be fair with everyone and I try to be realistic and understanding. And I'm like, look, if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. That's fair. But people start using very animated language like, oh, it's torture. Oh, it's, cruel. It's you're lazy, you're, shortcuts and stuff like that. And I'm like, but I don't mind if you don't like it, but a lot of that just doesn't even seem factual. Like it's based on any sort of actual knowledge of how you work with an e-collar.
Right. And, there's always this contradiction of, people who are science-based dog trainers. And it's one of those things is, well, you can't pick what part of science it is that you actually choose, right? So part of the scientific method is actually doing something, trying something and experimenting to see if you receive a result, right? So it's like, how are you going to judge something if you've actually never used it? But this commonly happens in human culture all the time, right?
Yeah, and when we're talking public perception, I mean, the reason why I bring up trainers is because trainers, I mean, who more than a dog trainer would sway the public perception in dog training?
Yeah,
So
we educate them.
Right, but in the public in general, I agree that the overall feel of e-collars is like lukewarm right now, but it's kind of getting there though. More and more people I come across are opening up to the idea, which I find it interesting because definitely when we talk public perception, uh, pure positive stuff is killing it right now. I think like all the biggest dog trainers on YouTube right now are all pure positive people, which is cool and everything. So when you like are aware of this fact, you would just assume people think of e-collar as like the perfect opposite of pure positive training. People think of e-collars as like, not only can they sometimes think of them as like unnecessary or bad for whatever reason, but people, if you were to place training tools on like a hierarchy, people assume like, oh my God, if your dog's really bad, you bust out the e-collar. And
right.
and so I'm excited to kind of get into what the real, and get rid of a lot of this like mythology around the collar, because I think so often people are so misled, and I'm interested in finding out exactly where that comes from, but also just being proactive and trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I'm down. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into a little bit of kind of what dog trainers think, both on the pro e-collar side and the anti e-collar side. I guess in this one, can I get your guys' permission? I want to kind of play the devil's advocate. Can I do the anti e-collar argument?
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
Perfect. I love this. Do you want to go ahead and start with some of the pros, Mariano, or Shona, whichever one?
Let's Shona do it.
Yeah, let's go, Shona.
Pros of an e-collar?
Yeah, like as a dog trainer, what are some of the pros of e-collar work?
To me, the number one pro is the ability to communicate with your dog off leash. To me, it's the ultimate freedom for you and your dog. It gives you peace of mind because, you can just reach into your pocket and press a button and talk to your dog. So to me, there's nothing that can replace that. So that's the biggest pro is off leash. #off-leash life. Being able to go off leash and not worry. I think that would be the number one pro. Also just the ease of use for the user. It's not like having to use a collar or a leash that's like this very manual tool, where a lot of people actually can't do that. Maybe older people who struggle with like using their bodies in a certain way. E-collars are so easy because you can just press a button, like literally at the press of a button. And I just love that. So yeah, those are my two top pros, I'd say.
I love it.
And just how seamlessly they integrate into the positive reinforcement process. Like for me, I use them alongside with food, and it's just so powerful to see how much it can help a dog along in understanding pressure. And we can get into that later. It's a bit technical.
Yeah.
But
Well, maybe in the good practice section. I like that. I love that. I think those are really great. How about you, Mariano?
Yeah, well, I think, I agree with all those. And just to add to them, I think that when you work, with clients, after a while, you start to notice that one of the big benefits of e-collar that isn't necessarily one of like the first few major benefits that people are quick to bring up is there's a certain, it is easy, but it's also repeatable. I'll work with clients where it's like there's mom and dad and then the kids, and like, mom and dad can walk the dog just fine, or dad's always the softie for whatever reason. So it's like mom can
That's always the case.
it's true, right? So like,
Yeah.
mom can always leash pop a dog on point, but dads, for whatever reason, they just don't want to do it. Like they're strong enough and everything, but they just don't. And so it's easy to mess that up,
Yeah.
which then throws the dynamic of everything off, because then now the dog can kind of play favorites, which is what got them to a trainer in the first place most of the time. And so in e-collar, a button is a button, and you set it to the level that's appropriate at the time, depending on the context. And we'll get into the ins and outs of all that. But there's a certain consistency to it that I really appreciate. And when we talk about off-leash, control, there's also a certain consistency to be able to manage your dog, even if like they're in the crate while I'm in the kitchen making food, or like outside in the yard barking and stuff like that. But also there's a certain kind of dynamic nature to it that I think other collars can't reproduce. Like one thing that I love about e-collar that I haven't been able to do with any other collar, at least not to the level that an e-collar can, is correct on other people's behalf. And an example being my personal dogs. Brent, my dogs. They're big dogs. And, let's say I walk in the house, dogs are all excited. They barrel to the door. And I can really easily like, hey, calm down, back up. I'm excited to see you, but there was no jumping. There was no, like, all the rules are still in play. And let's say, for example, then my mom were to come visit. She walks in my house. She knows all the dogs. Everything's on the up and up. And she knows already to like not let them jump. But she doesn't quite have the belief behind her. She doesn't have the body language to give appropriate like social pressure to get them off of her. Right? So she'll be like saying the right thing, Simba no, Simba off, River off, but she's not giving the appropriate everything else. So the dogs are still jumping anyway. And so I can go as a separate person and be like, hey, off, and go reinforce my own rule. And it really helps them not jump like when they can see me. But I've done it before to where my mom and my little brothers and sisters walk into the house. They go and they're diving in. The dogs have no idea that I'm around, by the way. I'm like in the next room, but I can just hear what's happening. And so, and I just time it. I can hear Simba off, boom, I push his button at the same time. And, and he sees it as like, whoa, grandma doesn't play. I'm sorry. And he goes away. And then, and there's a certain element like that I just haven't found with other things. And and I've got better examples too for later, but I think that we'll stick with that for now.
Yeah. I totally agree. Well,
that's a great example.
I want to just kind of recap your guys' pros, and because I share a lot of those same opinions as well. But I think the consistency of feedback is super important right across the board, and that's kind of what you were alluding to in the last thing. But like if we've all been on a leash, depending on the dynamics, the speed of travel, the physics behind it, sometimes we get a good correction, sometimes you get a weak correction, right? It's all hard. Versus we can kind of create consistent feedback on the remote tool itself. I really loved your point about how, it's especially people who physically cannot give or who don't have the upper body strength to maybe handle or control a dog physically. I have a personal story about that. I had a woman who was 75 years old. Her husband passed away, and so did the dog that they had for 14 years, right? Who was a golden retriever. And she actually decided to get a new golden retriever puppy. Right. This golden retriever, she loved this dog, but man, she came for training as soon as the dog was like 2-3 months old, because this dog was not the sweet, lazy golden that she had with her husband. Right. And on accident, she accidentally got more of a working line of a golden who was more, who left to fetch, who left to chew, who left to mouth, who left to do all these things. So I remember working from her from 8 weeks to 4 months for just, puppy raising and management and all these things. We got to teach the dog to fetch and throw ball and swim and do all these cool things. But then it got to this point where we started doing leash training. So we did leash training, great. But as soon as the dog hit 6-7 months, this dog who was great on leash, all of a sudden started getting more like a little bit older, right? He started getting more pushy. In essence, he started going through pre-adolescence, right? And now he's 3 times bigger than he was when he was a puppy, right? So now he's a lot stronger. And this was actually a great use of not only getting the dog trained, but making sure that we could come up with a system where this elderly woman could actually still manage her dog and give him the exercise he needs and give him the walks that he needs. Because, you know, at the end of the day, it got to the point he was very obedient, but this dog loves squirrels. So it got to this point where, you know, and especially at 75, when you're getting older, you know, one little slip, one little fall, it's not a good look, for you. And when you're in those ages. So that was definitely one of the situations for me that really solidified the place in dog training to be able to help this woman. And this was actually really early on in my career. I'll be upfront and say for the first 8 years of my career, I did not believe in e-collars at all. Right. So e-collars for me is only the last 4 years I've been exposed to them. I've been working with them. You know, as I got into more off-leash work, as I got into more behavior modification and working with more high drive dogs over the years, it showed its light of where its place is in my schematic of dog training. And so that just being said, like I'm ready to argue why e-collars suck, because I used to be of that state of mind. So so a lot of times I've been converted. Now, mind you, e-collar is not my go-to tool. And some dog trainers, it is their go-to tool, but definitely I see its place and I see its use in dog training in general. And just maybe because I'm old-fashioned that way, right? So let's go ahead and argue a little bit of the anti e-collar points that I used to say, right? So number one, e-collar, you know, back when I didn't like e-collars, we would definitely commonly say like, well, it's cruel, right? And it's cruel because you have to zap the dog to be able to get them to comply, right? And you know, that's always the argument. It's the perception of pain, right? There's this idea of pain and how it could potentially harm the dog, because as Mariano mentioned before, this idea, we think shock and we automatically think of tasers, right? And we think of the immobilization that happens when people in movies get hit by tasers, or people in real life get hit by tasers, right? We also, it's one of those taboo things, because, you know, a couple of years ago when I wasn't really into e-collars, it kind of seemed like too much power for one person. Right. It kind of seemed like, man, like, you know, with so much power comes so much responsibility, and it would be so easy to fuck a dog up. Right. So this was the perception before, like, don't even touch that thing, because in essence, you're playing with fire. Right. And so this idea that you're playing with fire, given the wrong instruction, given the wrong, you know, because there are people who just, you know, they said, oh, someone said I should get an e-collar. They go and they grab the e-collar, they slap it on their dog, and bada boom, bada bing, your dog's scared of a tree. You know, they're scared of a tree, or they're scared of a trash can, right? Or they're scared of something because that person wasn't coached on actually how to use it. So definitely, it also kind of leads to this idea of laziness. Right. So a lot of times a really simple way of looking at fixing behavior is kind of like whack-a-mole. Right. So the game whack-a-mole, where the mole pops up, you hit it on the head with a hammer, and it will be over. Right. And unfortunately, what we started hearing and seeing, you know, back when I was first coming up in the e-collar game, or before I was in the e-collar game, was, you know, malpractices and bad practices of all this, where the dog would bark at a dog and they would crank that thing up to really, really high, and they would start pushing buttons. And yeah, the dog would stop once or twice, but eventually either the dog gets preemptive of that shock, or the dog learns some self-helplessness, right? And these were some of the studies and stories that we were listening to back in the day. Again, all of these things can kind of be related to bad practices, which we'll definitely talk about later. But these are some of the arguments, right? Also, what a big thing was in where I came up was, you know, you shouldn't put an e-collar on the dog without doing fundamental work first, right? Because a lot of times people just want to solve their problems. So they think, you know, put the e-collar on the dog and just correct all the problems, and the dog's going to figure everything out as they go. So that's another reason why it kind of seemed like a lazy training technique. But what I've been told and what I've been taught and what I've researched over the last 4 years of actually experiencing e-collars it is with the right techniques and the right foundation, someone was able to make it make sense to me. So I that's awesome. So anyways, those were some of my arguments. Are there any arguments that you guys have kind of heard and over the years?
Yeah, well, I've definitely heard it's the lazy shortcut for people who don't really care about dogs type thing,
Mm-hmm.
or it's just like you don't care enough to put in the time. Like you'd rather hurt your dog than just put in the appropriate amount of time to train your dog with food the way that science was intended it to happen, and stuff like
Right.
that. Um, that's probably the one that I've heard the most. Sorry, I was looking up just now the like amperage of an e-collar because I used to know this information when I first started e-collar training, which was like a couple years before Brent did. Was I called educator like nonstop, and I was just learning everything about him before because the first dogs I e-collar trained were my personal dogs, and I'm seeing here that e-collars and bark collars come in at about 0.0003 joules, whereas an abdominal like exerciser comes in at like zero point 0.9. So we're talking very low in terms of amperages, and I got that question today, and I used to know like the exact figure for educator themselves, and of course it varies from like from the boss collars and the macros and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those, I know you don't believe this anymore, but like a lot of those arguments are easily kind of shoved aside when you realize a couple things, and we talk about this all the time, but context is everything. So when we talk about somebody being against an e-collar because they're afraid that it's going to cause like pain or you're going to misassociate something or whatever the case, you can do that without an e-collar. You can easily correct the wrong thing with a prong collar or whatever the case.
True.
And you can even just mess a dog up by reinforcing the wrong thing, like people with territorial dogs when they're like, Shh, it's okay, and the dog bites your son in the face.
Oh yeah.
So, I think it's worth mentioning that overall, we're talking low like power output. The job is not to hurt the dog. The job is not to tase the dog. It's got that sort of pulsing sensation. I was trying it today with a client of mine who's going to do a board and train program with me. And she's gone through like 3 different trainers in like the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks. And she's been just kind of let down over and over. And she was recommended through a friend of hers. And, and I told her, listen, let's do a couple private lessons. We'll get you on board and then we'll take the dog for the board and train. And so she said, okay, so today we started it.
It might be good for the audience. Can you describe what that dog's profile is like?
Yeah, so it's a 5-month-old Corgi Chihuahua mix. Very nervous and reactive. Smart, otherwise like playful dog, but really kind of shut down. Okay. And we're talking everything. Like this dog, when I was over there, was barking at airplanes in the sky. Literally. So, and a dude and a guy mowing his lawn like far away. So, this dog was afraid of everything in their yard. So she was like, man, when I walk this dog, it's like he hates his life, And so she's gone through a few different trainers. One of them was an all treat person. One of them just kind of, just pieced out on her after like a couple lessons and just kind of left her high and dry. Another guy was talking e-collar, but he definitely needs to learn more about how to use one. And I've got examples of that all day long. So I met with her. I explained to her the proper use of a collar in training. There's foundational work with the food stuff, then moving up to the different forms of pressure, ending on e-collar, and how you can actually use an e-collar, not just, with like low level pressure to teach commands, but how you can really start to shape the way that a dog sees things and how they socialize and interact with things and how their framework of the world can be drastically improved based on e-collar conditioning. So and she works at a hospital, so she was naming like all these different electronic machines that I can't rename.
A TEMS machine. Yeah, that's one.
What's the one that you use to like clear and kind of bring someone back?
Yeah. That's
a defibrillator or something. EKG, whatever it is. There you go. A thing. So like
electron. Wait, no, is it an EKG? Anyways, you got it. Go ahead.
Whatever. So the point was she brought that up like in jest. And then she tried it and she was like, oh, it's more like a whatever else machine. And I was like, yeah, sure. It's yeah. I was like, yeah, but I know what she's saying because I was like, yeah, it's kind of like, like muscle stim when you go to, and she was like, yes, exactly. And she jumped right on it. And I was like, see that the people think this, but when you get into the reality of it, it's something else. And then we started talking about how and why this stuff can work. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up to service. I realize you're just playing devil's advocate, but I just wanted to kind of give the other half of that.
And remember, I mean, I'm very proud to say that I didn't like it and now I was converted. You know what I mean? I think it's a great tool to have in the trainer's toolbox. And I love it. I definitely love the efficiency of it. And a lot of dogs over the years, like thousands, millions of dogs have benefited from it. So let's keep going. Okay. So as we do every deeper look, let's go into a little bit of the science of it, because, here's the thing is a lot of times in dog training, we hear this term science-based, right? And the positive, all positive will claim science-based, and even some of so we want to kind of argue that. But here's the thing with science-based, what they mean is it worked in a laboratory. Right. So this technique, it is proven by science to work. The part that they leave out is that it works in a laboratory or in a controlled environment. Right. And so sometimes because we don't necessarily have the ability to work in a laboratory or a closed environment, some of the techniques that might have been proven to work in a laboratory don't work in real life with real owners. Right. So it's really important that we go over kind of also the science of it. Again, in this episode, we're going to bring up B.F. Skinner and his operant conditioning quadrants. So let's go at it. Right. So I think e-collar work, it does focus on 2 quadrants that are very frowned upon, but very useful in the development and shaping of behavior. Right. So number 1, we're going to talk about negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, even though it sounds bad because the word negative is in there, negative mathematically means to remove something. And what we're removing in this situation is pressure. Right. And reinforcement is the concept where we want to reinforce or continue a behavior again in the future, right? To motivate that behavior to happen again. So negative reinforcement is what we're talking about. And then also we're talking about positive punishment, which is the adding of an aversive to be able to minimize the possibility that a behavior will happen again in the future, right? So we got these 2 things, negative reinforcement and punishment. In dog training, we call it pressure on, pressure off. Right. And then we also call it a correction. Okay. So in negative reinforcement, this is an idea. Another way to look at it is we call it escape and avoidance training. So escape and avoidance means we want to teach the dog to escape pressure. So once they feel pressure, how to escape it. And avoidance means they know that pressure will come. So how do I avoid that pressure from coming? Right. And that's usually where the positive punishment comes in. So a very interesting thing that comes in really beneficial, and I want you guys to riff on it a little bit. In e-collar training, e-collars are one of the only tools that in dog training that you can add what's called continuous pressure. Right. And continuous pressure means that I can hold a sensation on that e-collar for extended periods of time to be able to snap my dog out of, let's say, a state of mind that they're in or something that they're obsessing over. And ultimately what we're doing is we're teaching the dog to yield to a sensation. Right. Can you guys talk a little bit about some of the applications of that, like in real life? Like, why is that important? Like, to people listening, they might be like, what the fuck does that matter?
Yeah. Let me start off really quick, and then I'm going to kick it over to Shona, because I have a feeling that what I'm about to say is going to kind of head right down your alley. Okay. So here are a couple of examples of this in play. When we talk about constant pressure, well, before I get into that, I just want to give a quick understanding for other people. And there are, younger trainers who may be listening to this. When we talk about a dog working to avoid pressure, this isn't something that is specific to dog training. Whenever we talk about a dog that's reactive or nervous, or like this puppy that I was just talking about, that dog is reacting to the pressure that it feels for whatever the case. So it's still kind of working under the concept of how do I avoid this? How do I get out of here? And scientifically speaking, whenever we talk about people who are against e-collars because they're not scientific, I think the reason why they do work so well, kind of like social pressure and these other forms of training, the reason why they are so potent is because you're speaking the dog's language, so to speak. The only difference is you're using one pressure to outweigh another, and the difference with that is this pressure is more conducive to everyday life, because like garbage trucks and all that, they're going to be there. So if you stress out every time, your quality of life goes way down.
Right.
If I can condition you to avoid pressures in a way that is very specific, that I've taught you first how to get around, you're going to swim way more than you sink. And so the quality of life overall goes up. Now to get more to your point, then I'll kick it over to Shona about using constant pressure. There are a couple ways in which and e-collar is not the only way, actually. You can use, like, I've seen people, use constant pressure with like a prong collar. If they have to like, it's more like dominant dog collar type stuff where you pick up a dog and hold. And I don't necessarily think that that's the smartest thing to do, but I've seen it a lot more in the context of like literal physical control. Like if the dog is just going nuts and gator rolling, you pick up and hold so that the dog just ain't going anywhere. But in e-collar, you have this ability to apply constant pressure in a way that's very potent. But my thing about e-collar from a scientific standpoint that really makes it stand out, and this is what I put in my blog post about it like a couple years ago, was you can separate leash pressure from e-collar pressure. So you don't necessarily have to bring the dog in any direction in order to apply pressure. And you can pull and hold, which would make it essentially the same in workings as like a prong, but you can choose not to as well. And it's that sort of dynamic that opens things up. And so I wanted to bring up examples of where I see this kind of thing and where they really explain this well is like Sean O'Shea, Jeff Gelman. These guys are some of the more prominent e-collar behaviorists, of the moment. So I want to kick it over to Shona because I know that she follows them closely and just kind of get your feedback on this.
Yeah, I love both of those trainers very, very much. And I really studied a lot of like their videos and their techniques with continuous pressure. Basically, the way I do it is I use the e-collar pressure with leash pressure together always. So e-collar pressure is obviously not directional. So if you apply pressure with the e-collar to the dog, it doesn't tell them what to do or where to go, right? And then you pair that with the leash, and then that tells them where to go. The way I use continuous pressure is to eventually I pair it with the leash so that they understand the direction where that pressure should go, like where they should yield their body, if it's a sit or a down or a recall. And then once they've learned that, then you can take the leash away and start to use the continuous pressure just with the e-collar, and that's how you get to be off leash. And that's how I use it. I use them together. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were asking.
No, that's perfect.
No, that makes perfect sense, and that is what I was looking for. And it's worth noting. A fun way that I like to go about it is definitely there are only a few trainers that I've met in my lifetime that are good enough with an e-collar to straight up beginning to end e-collar condition a dog, like start at day one and really kind of shape behaviors with it. And you do it the right way. I like how you use your food and your timing and everything is on point, because there's a lot of people who are kind of sloppy with it, and that you start to see in the later phases of the dog's training. The dog will do what you want, but there's not that much like pep in the dog, and I know a lot of people are afraid of that kind of thing because they're like, oh, I just talked to somebody today who was like, oh, I don't know, I don't want my dog to be like a zombie and and lifeless.
I don't
want to
break his spirit.
Right. And I'm like, no, it's not that. It's just, if you're not good with your motivational work, your dog's just going to lack pep. That's not necessarily a function of the collar. You could do that without an e-collar. And so, I think that what I like to do in my personal training is when I've moved a dog from the different phases and now we're in e-collar, yes, 100%. I pair e-collar pressure with directional leash pressure in the beginning. And then later on, depending on what the dog's going to be doing, if we're talking like Schutzen stuff or high-level obedience stuff, I differentiate the two. And sometimes I'll contradict the two if we're talking like real high-level stuff. Like, for example, if we have a Schutzen dog that needs to be solid, crazy like stands of people everywhere yelling, guys in bite suits, which automatically put the dog like, oh, it's time to play, then we'll do something like we'll work our sits and downs with e-collar pressure and leash pressure. And then it'll be like sit, and I'm slightly tugging on the leash forward. So the dog is resisting me. Like I'm not pulling him to the point where he's like falling over, but slight pressure forward so that he feels the leash pressure and he's still tuning it out to listen to the release. Break, boom. And, and there are little things like that to where that's a very specific example. But in general, a time when I use e-collar pressure without necessarily using leash pressure is when it can mess the dog up. Like, let's say place command. I've had a dog in place command with a prong. Dog is in place, doesn't move from the bed, but let's say looks at the person walking in the house, growls and barks from the bed, doesn't move. So I'll correct, pop on the prong collar. And, whatever direction to the dog I'm in, I'm pulling in that direction because I'm popping. The dog gets up and comes to me. But on the e-collar, I'll correct without actual leash pressure. The dog stays put. And so there are examples of time where no leash pressure is good, but you have to build yourself to that point.
Right. Right. And I think that you guys are definitely describing some really great foundational practices for making sure e-collar does not become a tool that is just a whack-a-mole tool, right? You're not just trying to correct things.
Right,
You're trying to
right,
actually
right.
teach the dog and educate the dog that things that happen to him are in his control, right? And I think that's the most important part for the learner
Yes.
is they need to know how to navigate whatever lesson that it is you're trying to give them, which is so dope.
Yes, the dog controls the collar.
Exactly.
Like, I think that's a really important principle, is that, like, you talked earlier actually about the incredible power that you hold in your hand when you do have that on a dog and the remote in your hand. Yes, I agree. I think that you have an incredible amount of power and an incredible amount of responsibility. But it's very important to remember that actually the dog controls the pressure, you know.
Can
always.
I play devil's advocate really quick with you guys?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Because
I dare you.
Do you dare me? So I agree that you hold a huge amount of power, and I totally understand that sentiment of like don't overdo it. I definitely make sure that I explain that to people. Like, it's a button, it's easy. Make sure you're doing what you should be doing, but also people do not fall for the other mistake. It's not as much power as you would think. In that, I've met a lot of people that buy e-collars, don't do the training, just put the e-collar on the dog. And then they're like, okay, so I'm just going to take my dog for like an off-leash walk now.
That's a great point.
And that dog is like gone.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up. You're right. That does happen.
Dude, that for whatever reason, I'm just so unlucky that happens to me. Like, my dogs will be perfectly behaved. Somebody's dogs come bolting at us from, like, and I hear a frantic person behind them, Fido, no, Fido, no. And I see the dog getting corrected, like, and it's like, correction, bolting toward me, correction, bolting toward me. And I'm like, whoa,
Right.
this is not good. And I try to explain to people all the time, like, people buy the collar and think it's like an end all be all. And it's like, no, it's a training tool that requires understandings on the dog's part.
There's protocols you got to follow. Yeah.
Right.
It's called a training tool, not a fix your fucking behavior problem.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I think it's like anything. I think the tool is the tool, and then you have to add training to it.
Yeah.
I mean,
100%.
To go back to another negative thing you were saying is like, well, I'm worried like I will mess up my dog.
Right.
I'm worried the e-collar will mess up my dog.
Right.
And it's like anything can mess up. A leash can mess up.
Not
your dog,
training your dog will mess up your dog.
Right.
Yeah. Touch petting your dog can mess up your dog.
True.
Feeding your dog some grapes will mess up your dog. It's just a matter of how you
exactly.
Feeding your dog grapes.
That would lead to kidney failure. Yes.
Yeah. Chocolate's not good.
Or
how about chocolate? That's good.
Chocolate.
That's good for
chocolate will mess up your dog. And I really believe that. I mean, so yeah, the e-collar could totally mess up your dog. But so could absolutely anything else.
Right.
So you have to
again,
know the training, use the training.
We'll say this in almost every video we do. It's not the tool, it's the practitioner. Always.
Oh yeah.
Always.
The practitioner.
Always the practitioner.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's right.
So a couple things, because I know we got to kind of move on a little bit to the next subject. So I love that riff, by the way. That was so good. Recall, I mean, continuous pressure is phenomenal in the use of recall development. Especially when we have high drive dogs, your Vizslas, your Weimaraners, any dog who has a really high prey drive, who just cannot break the obsession for certain things, squirrels, bunny rabbits, whatever it is that you guys have in your neighborhood that the dog obsesses over. Continuous pressure is awesome for those types of things. What else? I would say it definitely helps in like stay work, which is great, especially if you have a dog who is a high drive dog. Stays it's wonderful for stays. What else? If you guys just gonna bullet point them, boom, boom, boom. So recall.
For continuous.
Well, it's just beautiful for shaping. It's beautiful for shaping. You can really shape a really specific behavior in a dog with it, if that makes sense. Like with recall, like being able to make a dog, having to do the turn on a dime motion. It's so cool. It's so cool. Fido come, turns, and you can pattern that turn with continuous pressure, because you apply the pressure. The second that dog turns their head around, the pressure comes off. And they learn, that second that they change their body position, that the pressure will turn off. It creates that really, in my opinion, really beautiful shaping. That's the word I use for it. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And I think what
it has so many uses, the continuous function.
As you say that about the recall, what stands out to me is...
Just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh, 100%. What stands out to me when you say that is the clarity of it, because markers are still king, even in e-collar training. And so if I've got a dog bolting after something, no, come, and I'm on my e-collar, I'm on the button, dog turns around. The second they turn around, not only does my finger come off the button, but I immediately start marking, good boy, come here, good boy. And you can be super clear now about the dog's like, I'm on the right track. Got it. And when I consider constant pressure, I look at the two different extremes of like, constant pressure can definitely, it's amazing for like slowing down drive and like hyper excitement. And that's kind of where e-collars can separate themselves from like other training tools like a prong collar, to where prong collars are great. I use prong collars. I'm happy with them. But sometimes very few dogs, they amp the dog up and they don't quite
stimulating.
Correct. Right. Whereas an e-collar can really kind of mellow the dogs out. And that's an amazing thing. But also you can actually use an e-collar to build that crazy drive in a dog. So again, I'd look at something like I know some really high level Schutzen guys that were like world teams guys that they actually use e-collar constant pressure in the recall in a different kind of way when the dog is barreling right at the guy in the bite suit to amp them up that much more. And it's like, go, boom, 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 and the dog is like, you see him just dive extra hard. And, the goal is to like, I want the dog to grab his arm because the guy's running. Grab the arm, and if the guy doesn't fall on his ass, then like we're doing it again, and it's it's really cool to see how it's just such a diverse tool.
Yeah, it definitely is its own form of motivation. You know? Definitely is. Let's see. That was great. I think that was really great. Negative reinforcement. One little thing that I really like about pressure work is just the lack of physicality to the body. Right? Like you don't have to put physical pressure on the neck necessarily. You don't have to actually like contort the dog's body in any specific way once things are shaped. I think that's really cool. And then one of the last ways that we use e-collars is as a corrective form, right? Or as an attention grabbing form. So those of you guys who listen to the correction podcast, we have what's called guidance, right? Or like shaping as a lure. We can use pressure as a lure. We can use pressure as a reminder. We can also use pressure as a correction, right? And e-collars definitely fit that category at different intensities that are very consistent. So that's really good. Mariano, let's go ahead and jump into good practices. What are some great practices? And while you guys riff on that, I'm going to go ahead and step to the restroom real fast. But go ahead and tell the listeners what you got.
All right. So good practices. I'm going to start actually with the very basic stuff because you'd be amazed how many people get this wrong. Make sure that you get the right e-collar for your dog. Now, with that, we talk about quality e-collars because there are tons of e-collars out there that range from like, what's the cheapest e-collar you've seen, Shona? Like $40? Something like that on Amazon?
Oh, yeah. If they're on sale, like 35, pretty bad.
Like $35, $40.
Yeah, pretty concerning.
Right. And I can appreciate saving money, as well as the next guy. But e-collars are definitely one of the few places in dog training where it will really, really pay off 100 times over to just get yourself a good one. I know that they're pricey. Good e-collars range from like $180 to like $250.
And then of course there's like multiple dog systems which are going to push more into the 300.
Right.
I can't remember exactly. But expensive and they should be.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Well, quality is important, and especially with an e-collar when we talk about because in lower quality e-collars, I have actually seen some of the things that people are afraid of. So a lot of the fears that people have, it's not that they're wrong. It's just it's situational. If you've got yourself a good e-collar with proper training and stuff like that, then you're not going to have this problem. And so, when we talk about like, is it still technically within reality that something could go wrong? Then we get back to what you were saying earlier of like, well, yeah, but it's also possible again that something else could mess up the dog. So at this point, we're doing what we need to do to make sure that the outcome is as probable as it can possibly be. So once you've got yourself a quality e-collar, proper fitment is important. Proper contact points are important. Brent and I have made a couple mistakes there, and like dogs have had not good contact, so you get inconsistent readings on the e-collar numbers.
I tell you, with these fluffy guys,
right?
It can be tricky.
Those damn huskies.
To make sure you're making. You have to be doing like a working level test a lot. I mean, I really feel like you need to make sure you're making skin tone. Yes, huskies.
Yeah, Malamutes.
Just like I've had some tough like just German shepherds. You know, but it's thick under there.
I'm training
you know what I mean?
Shepherd Lab mix. I'm training is the same issue, and I got them some thick fur contact points, and I also told them like consider it's summertime and in Arizona it's hot anyway, so he's gonna like kind of shave his dog down a little anyway. But I was like, consider cutting down just a little bit on the neck area so that the contact points can get there that much easier, so the collar doesn't have to be as tight. But little things like that make a huge difference. Now, when we talk about other good practices, I want to hear you riff on this a little, Shona, but low level working pressure, that's something that people who are afraid of e-collars don't seem to know much about.
Yeah, they don't know that it's low, and I love showing how low it really is. I mean, trying to find a working level on a dog can be frustrating because it's so almost imperceptible. It's like, are they feeling that? And it's, and you really have to be very like conscious of like, okay, am I seeing any reaction here? So yeah. Were you going to ask a specific question?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little situation that I talked about, I think, in our last episode or the one before that. So I've got a dog with me right now. It's a board and trained dog, 5-month-old black lab puppy, and she's super sweet. Doesn't have any sort of like behavioral issue, but she's a rambunctious puppy, and she jumps and nips and barks and she pulls like really, and so the owners have had a hard time dealing with her. And I was talking about e-collar only because she's 5 months right now, but pretty soon she's going to be a giant. And most labs that I train do amazing on e-collar. Long-term viability wise, the lab can go through his entire life cycle on an e-collar and be great. And so I was explaining to them like, yeah, you guys should really consider e-collar, and they were weary of it. And they were like, well, I saw this one on Amazon that like has a vibration function. Can I get that? And I was like, well, you could, but my problem with that is there's no nuance to the vibration. It's one setting. And a lot of times
you guys want to know something real quick? Sorry to cut you off. I've actually found that vibrations are actually sometimes more aversive than the actual stimulation itself.
Oh, well, that was going to be what I was going to say. Yes, sometimes like my dog, oh my gosh, he would much prefer a level 5 quick stim reminder tap than a vibration. He hates that vibration.
Yeah, some dogs,
he shakes like his whole body.
Yeah, it traumatizes them sometimes. It's nuts.
Well, yeah, that's what I was getting at, was like it can actually hit really hard, and in most cases it hits too hard until the dog is distracted. Then the dog could care less. So it's pretty close to being useless. Like the only time the vibration works for me personally is if we're talking like really low level distraction for my own dogs that are already highly e-collar trained, so I can like, at that point I can hit the button that switches between like the modes, and my little remote beeps, and they're like, whoops, I'm good. So, but this person, and then I want you to hear you kind of riff on this. They were like, okay, why do you need more than one level? And I was like, well, it's interesting because you want to be able to work low level pressure. It's not all just about corrections. So go ahead.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, so you want to be able to have as much functionality as possible. So like low levels obviously are going to be super, super important for teaching new stuff, because I see it as a part of the positive reinforcement process, and actually like a motivator in that sense. It's interesting you were describing it as escape and avoidance. I suppose that is technically what's happening. I've seen a lot of dogs though that they enjoy the whole process when you like add food, and I make it really, really fun. So dogs really enjoy that. You also need higher levels for aversive, when you need to correct things, it needs to be higher. So, and the other main thing is that it's not just low and high. It's not just two settings. Low can mean several different things depending on environmentals and distractions. So that number can go up and down depending on where the dog is. So if we're in a very calm living room, we're going to be at this low level. And if we're outside in the yard, we're going to be at a low level. It might be a couple notches up though, because
sometimes 20 is a low level, depending on who you're with.
Yes, exactly. Depends on the dog. And then if we take that same dog from we've been in the living room, now we're in the yard, and now we're going to like the park, we might need to go up even a little bit more. And this is still low, as in low meaning when I use this level on this dog, they are calm. They are responsive, yes, but they're calm, they're relaxed, they're listening. It's not this big aversive corrective level at all. So with the collars I use, the eCollar Technologies brand, they come with 100 levels, as you guys know, and you can just achieve an incredible level of specificity in that. And I love it. So that's why I would never use vibration. It's just one dull, constant buzz, which, as we've talked about, can be a bit overwhelming.
And also the dogs get habituated to the sensation. You know what I mean?
Yes. So this is the thing. I think people say, well, I used the vibration and it totally worked. Yeah, they stopped barking, or they stopped the thing. So yeah, I can just use vibration. And then, of course, 1 week later, well, they kind of kept jumping, or they don't really care because they realize the vibration is like not a big deal. Yeah. It's like the initial surprise of maybe a vibration. Like, whoa, what was that? Yep. And then they get used to it, and it's like, Whereas a stimulation, yes, is going to matter a little bit more to the dog. Is going to be, they're going to want to tune in a bit more to that feeling.
Yep.
So yeah, that would be my answer to those parents.
Yep.
Is the term that people are using.
No, that was perfect. I want to just mention something real quick. So I had the privilege of training a deaf dog on the educator's vibration only collar, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that I could actually, so I had to use it the exact same way I would use a stimulation collar. And eventually we did completely convert to stimulation collar, but in the very, very beginning, it was interesting to have a collar that did have multiple levels and varying levels of vibration, versus like a normal e-collar that only has one level. Right. So just that differences of making it lower, making it higher, that just adding those dynamics definitely makes the learning process a lot easier, because there's no way I could have been able to train that deaf dog without those different.
Oh my gosh! So glad you mentioned deaf dogs. I mean, talk about like the best thing ever if you have a deaf dog. E-collars are amazing. And actually, to go back to vibration and deaf dogs, because the vibration can so quickly become this like non-event for the dog. I actually did also train a deaf dog on an e-collar, and I used the vibration as the marker, positive marker.
Nice.
Yeah. That's so that cool. That was the click or the yes, that became, because this dog thankfully didn't mind it.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
This dog didn't mind the vibration, so I was able, and vibration's kind of relaxing if you do enjoy it. So,
it's like a massage, like a little massage.
Yeah, so I would vibrate, reward, and it was great, super clear. And so yes, the vibration actually can be really useful. And then the other reason I would use vibration on like a regular hearing dog is just to kind of get their attention real quick, just like a quick buzz. Some dogs, they'll look at you, and that could be fun.
Yeah.
But most dogs I'll not use I'll use the tone function instead.
Right.
Which is the beep.
Right.
The beep.
Yeah, it's all, the whole tool is really about getting attention, and we can get them across different ways, right? Any other good practices you guys want to talk about?
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about proper foundational work with e-collar. Yeah. That's something that's probably one that I see
It's
wrong.
Muy importante.
Yeah, it's muy caliente. It's probably one that I see wrong the most. People buy the e-collar and don't do any sort of training with it. So the dog is just expected to automatically know things. And again, the e-collar pressure is not directional. So the dog's just getting corrected on top of whatever the other stimulus is. So definitely, I want to dive into proper foundational work a little bit.
Yep. You pick.
Yep.
Who wants to go?
Let's start with you, Brent.
All righty. Proper foundational work. Pretty much, if your dog, never put an e-collar on a dog with a blank slate who doesn't know anything, right? Pretty much what this is like, if you have a very ignorant, impulsive, all over the place dog, always one of our first goals is to try and gain focus over dogs. Now, don't get me wrong, e-collars can be used in the efforts of getting focus on a dog. However, if we can shape, right, we always got to follow that LEMA, least intrusive, minimally aversive. If we can shape using positive reinforcement methods, let's do it. Why not? Right? If we can get the dog to like doing something, that's way better than forcing the dog to doing something. And there's not really any arguing in that. But when we start getting into more advanced behaviors like prey drive or controlling instinct, there's sometimes it's not about whether the dog likes it or not. But so proper foundational would be practice. Make sure your dog knows your sit, their down, their stay. Make sure that we have a luring system, right? Whether that luring system is with food, that luring system could be with leash pressure. The luring system has to be developed because dogs don't know directional pressure. So whatever lure it is that we're using has to provide some type of directional pressure in that dog. And as much as we can develop the dog's desire to want to listen to us, that will definitely help us for more long-term, especially off-leash work, but definitely when we start introducing e-collar pressure, if we can get the dog to like doing stuff up front, then it's going to make the transition onto e-collar a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. A couple points on that. So we talked, I think, 1 or 2 episodes ago about there's just such a broad spectrum of dog training in terms of the different methods and the different tools and skill sets that people have as they kind of go through their dog training life cycle. And I think that you actually can completely e-collar train a dog from beginning to end. And it's not something that I do very often. I mean, I do definitely, if we're talking phases in training and we're talking the typical stuff like food work, leash pressure, e-collar pressure, if it kind of went in that order, like typically speaking, right? We can agree that that's most likely the case.
Right.
There are situations like, I work with the rescue. I have feral dogs in here quite a bit. They trap them, get them all vaccinated and fixed and all that, then send them to me. The dog is not interested in my food. The dog is not interested in anything, leash, crate, anything.
Right.
So I have actually trained quite a few dogs, like beginning to end, leash pressure, and then I finally get to the point to where I built enough trust with them, strictly with e-collar, that they will now accept food, and then I can go back and do phase 1 stuff on the back end of everything. But I'll put this caveat on it. I do agree that food work does get that extra bit of pep out of the dog, and ultimately, as trainers, I want to do yes, I totally agree with Lima. I also, we're kind of working on a few different levels here. There's like Lima for the dog, 100%, whenever possible. But also what's most effective and realistic for the client. What's also, what's like, there are a few things.
Context. Yeah.
Right. So as far as an e-collar trainer, I would say definitely use food alongside your e-collar, but just me and you talked about how good within a particular skill set are you, because that will affect the trajectory of the dog. And so I think an e-collar trainer that's good enough can e-collar train a dog from beginning to end. It doesn't necessarily mean you should, but if you have that skill set, then I think you're on the right track.
Right.
Maybe counter something you said, Brent, about like not just putting an e-collar on and starting training.
Do it.
When you say that, you're talking about like training new things, like new skills.
Right.
Like, how do you feel about dog is displaying, a dangerous behavior?
So that would be,
jumping.
that's not so much teaching.
How do you feel about putting it on and doing it?
So that's fine with me. That's not necessarily teaching a new behavior. It's blocking old behaviors. Right. So if you're blocking an old behavior like lunging, biting, like anything that obviously that is unacceptable. What I'm saying is there are some people, that might throw an e-collar on a dog without any idea of down. Right. So in a perfect world, we would have shaped the down already, maybe with leash or food, and then we'd be able to teach the dog down. Right. So shaping, and we talked about this in our positive reinforcement episode where we talked about, they've proven that positive reinforcement is the best way to shape new behaviors.
Right.
But that's not, but that's not to say that negative reinforcement or positive punishment can't be used to block behaviors, right? So definitely blocking behaviors, controlling bad behaviors, controlling impulse, those things are what it's used. But blocking a behavior is not the same as shaping a brand new behavior.
Well, you know what, too? I want to be clear for again, for the younger dog trainers or people who might be struggling with their dogs who might be listening to this. Shaping new behaviors are like, 3 malleable terms. So when we talk about shaping a new behavior, in the context that I know that you mean, yes, food work definitely has a certain special aspect to it that e-collars don't. But when we talk about behaviors are not just singular. Sometimes a dog's overall behavior is the issue. So it's like a dog can know how to sit. I've met a ton of dogs that have come to us. I tell people all the time, a good portion of my client base, just doing what I do, have already been trained, but they just still need work. And
they're assholes. Yeah.
Right. And so I've seen dogs that are like with food work, they're on point. I think of like new cuz, or I think of
Mm-hmm.
other dogs that they do well with it, but it just isn't quite the complete picture. And so
Right.
I do think that when we talk about shaping behaviors, part of shaping behaviors as a definition is limiting those other behaviors, because then, I kind of think of it as like the dog's cup is full. If he's going nuts over a squirrel, and you can tell him all the behaviors you want, and he can know them too, but he's just not in a place to hear you right now. So you kind of bringing him back to neutral, and giving yourself space to where you can now give him input and he's willing to accept it. He's like in a place now where he can do that. That
Right.
to me is shaping behaviors. And
Right.
and I kind of see it as like a gas pedal and a brake pedal. You slow him down with this and speed him up with that, and to me it's all part of one kind of whole of shaping a dog's behavior overall.
I get that. I get the terminology. I totally get that. Yeah, I'm not going to argue. I think I get the perspective when I'm talking about more unnatural behaviors, the sits, the downs, the like a finish, things like that, like things that may be a little bit more complex.
Oh yeah, it's all good. Yeah, I don't expect an argument.
Sure.
I'm more just giving the other side of the,
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah, that's
Right.
really important.
Yeah.
Cool, guys. Are we ready to move on to some bad practices?
Let's do it.
Get it.
Uh-oh.
Okay. So bad practice. Shona, start it off. What you got?
Oh man. Honestly, what you were just saying, but I want to be super clear about this. Bad practices is, asking the dog for a command that you have not appropriately taught. Taught. You've not appropriately taught. They don't know it. And then so you say down, they don't down, and then you correct at a high level. That's really, really bad. You can't do that, right? So yes. There is a stage of training, which is a very final stage, where yes, I will actually correct at a higher level for a dog that does not comply. Non-compliance, STIM is what I've kind of heard it called. But that's a dog who has done hundreds or thousands of repetitions of sit or down, or let's say we're talking about sit. This dog has done hundreds or thousands of repetitions of sit with tons of food and tons of encouragement and praise and leash guidance. And if I say sit to that dog and that dog does not sit, yes, I may administer a quick correction,
right,
to make sure that they are listening and they understand they can't ignore.
You're holding the dog accountable at that point because he knows.
You're holding the dog accountable for something that they know, a known command. But a dog that you've like kind of worked on sit maybe for like a couple days and they don't really, and you're like, yeah, they know it now. And then you say sit, they don't sit, and you start correcting. That's the worst to me. Like you can't do that.
Right.
So that would be, I don't know if that would be over correcting, but to me, I'd call that like way too early correcting.
Yeah. Over
impatience.
Yep.
I think that's a symptom of impatience on the part of the trainer.
That's a very good perspective. Impatience fucks people up a lot and fucks dogs up a lot, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. Okay. So that would be number one. Don't do it.
One thing that I want to bring up, which is again, I think in every series that we do of the deeper look, we always talk about bad timing. Right. And so let's talk about some of the problems that can exist in bad timing with e-collars. There's something called superstitious learning or superstitious fears, right? Where a dog or superstitious associations. I'm so sorry. Superstitious association means if you have bad timing, if you correct the dog at a high level with an e-collar while he was walking by that bush, well, that dog learns to develop a healthy fear of that bush, right? Or if you correct, and in some situations, don't get me wrong, we want to create superstitious association. So rattlesnake training is all about superstitious association. We want the dogs to have a healthy fear of rattlesnakes. So what they do is they put rattlesnakes in a basket. They let the dog go and approach the basket. If the dog reacts towards the basket, they give that dog a freaking crazy correction because they want that dog to associate fear with those rattlesnakes. And that's ultimately what rattlesnake training is, right?
Right. 100%.
So in some ways it's good, right? There's been many times I have many clients that live in the canyons out here in LA, Laurel Canyon, Benedict Canyon, Coldwater Canyon, all the canyons, right? And their
Mhm.
fence actually opens up directly to the canyon, right? So if their dog were to get out of those gates, that dog would run out onto the main street, right? And most likely get hit by a car.
Mhm.
So in some situations, we do want to use superstitious associations. I do want the dog to know that there's a very clear barrier, but sometimes with really bad timing, we get the dog to be fearful of things that they're not supposed to be fearful of, right? And that's just that's a bad. We have a bad
Right,
setup
right,
or
right.
bad timing in that particular lesson.
Right.
So that's something I wanted to throw in the basket.
Yeah, definitely. I think that also kind of leaves the door open for learned
Yeah.
helplessness. And I was excited to bring this one back up. I know we talked about it last episode, but learned helplessness, for those who don't know, the long description of it is if you put pressure on a dog, which in training isn't necessarily a bad thing to do, but there needs to be clarity of how you turn that pressure off. Like Shauna said it perfectly. The dog controls the collar, or the dog controls the leash too, or whatever the pressure is in the moment. But when the dog isn't
Yeah.
clear
Mhm.
about what the way out of this pressure is, they have a habit of just shutting down altogether. And they're like, if I can't figure out what to do, I'm just going to do nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
that, when we talk about overcorrecting or just miscorrecting in general, and we use the example of maybe you correct it too high for like the dog won't sit, so you're turning up pressure, you're impatient, and now the dog really won't sit. But people can
Right.
perceive it as the dog is being pushy, when in reality the dog is just like, I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna like basically fight for my life right now. And so
Mm-hmm.
things can easily spiral out of control if you're not paying close attention to how much pressure is appropriate, but also how clear is your direction. Does your dog
Right.
completely 100% understand you turn the collar off by doing this? Just do it. And then once you do,
Right.
then you get your rewards and everything else on top of the now lack of pressure from the collar. You can compound the like reinforcer. So
Yeah.
that's definitely something to be weary of, and that kind of plays into when we talk about the good practice to counteract it, proper foundational work. But I think learned helplessness is something that people get wrong a ton. I see it a lot actually in prong collar training too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and people can be a little heavy-handed with it or a little early with it, like we were talking about, or correcting the wrong thing. So definitely something to be careful of. Try to make sure that you're clear, your corrections are appropriate not only in their timing but their intensity, and that will that in and of itself will go very far into like taking steps in the right direction and avoiding some of these pitfalls.
Right. Right. I do just have to mention bad practices. Yeah, I love my clients, but there's always a learning curve when learning new tools. Number one, this is funny. Charge your collar. That's really important.
Oh yeah.
That's
I was considering writing that down,
Yeah.
and I was like, nah, people get it, but dude,
no,
I do get that quite a bit.
yeah, like I had a client. A funny story is, we did an off leash program with her, and she's a really high drive pitty, and and we were working, and she comes for a follow up, and I'm like, so how's she do? She goes, she's doing a lot better than she was before. And I said, how is she doing comparing to graduation? She's like, well, I mean, I would say she's like 80% for where she was for graduation. I'm like, 80%? That's so strange because she was so sharp and so motivated, this dog. So we're doing a lesson, and I'm looking and I'm asking her like, okay, go ahead and ask the recall. And I'm whether she's roaming out in the field, and I said, okay, ask the recall. And the dog, I'm not really seeing a flinch or a response from the dog. And I'm like, go ahead, are you pushing the button? She goes, yeah, I'm pushing it. So I go in just to make sure the contacts on the collar are proper, right? That the fit is proper. And it's a short-haired pitty, so it's
Yeah.
really hard to mess that up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I put it on,
Yeah.
and I said, go ahead and
Right.
hit the vibrate
Yeah,
real
hard.
quick. And I grabbed the button, and the collar doesn't even turn on. And I said, when was the last time? I said, when was the last time you charged this collar? And she looks at me super perplexed, and she goes, charge the collar? And
Oh,
I go,
no.
oh, sweetie, you have to charge the collar like every other day if you're going to use it this much. And she goes, oh yeah, well that's something. But so the interesting thing is the dog was still 80%, right? And this is a very high drive pitty, right? And so she was still pretty
Yeah.
responsive. But as soon as we got her on a charge collar and got her going, she was back at where she was at graduation level. So it was really interesting. So
amazing.
definitely charging your tools, getting to learn the tools, because there is a learning curve for sure.
Right.
Not knowing the tools, not knowing the functionality of the specific device that you have, be it an educator, a Dogtra, a Tektronix. Like there's so many different models out there. but yeah, and then making sure you have a good fit. I think that's really, really important. Some bad practices that I've had to learn the hard way is what happens when you put on the wrong contact points and what happens when you leave it on for too long or too tight. So definitely there's something known as necrosis, which is pressure sores. And if you leave contact points on for too long in the same space on e-collars, one of the downsides is they can create pressure sores on the dog. And a lot of people, they sometimes interpret this as they are burns from the electricity that's coming from the collar, which is wrong. We know it's wrong, but however, we can't blame the public for thinking those things. It's our job as educators to really teach people what they need to, what the proper maintenance and protocols are to follow on these tools.
Right. And sometimes that maintenance goes a little deeper than just picking the right contact points. Sometimes it's a matter of trimming down the dog's neck hair a little bit, or going for like a comfort adapter, or, there's it's nice that they have all these different attachments. I think that's another benefit of good quality e-collars is they come with accessories that really help complete the product. But definitely I've made that mistake too. You and I was talking about that horror story with Pippi. So we've definitely had our fair share of, things going sideways with the wrong contact points. I think another big one is moving too fast into off leash. I really try to make it a point to explain to people the difference between e-collar training your dog and off leash training your dog. You can have an e-collar and a leash on, and for some reason people get surprised by that. Like it's almost like you tell them to charge the e-collar, they're like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Like,
it makes me laugh every time. It makes me laugh.
And another big one is like, yeah, I've met people that charge the collar, but then I'm like, well, did you turn it on?
Yes.
Oh.
No, I mean, it happens.
There's a lot of steps, and I always tell people these collars are meant to be childproof.
Right,
so
right.
That's why there's so many steps to turn them on.
But yeah, so moving a dog too fast into off leash definitely can equate to bad things. Not only because this kind of overlays with a lot of the other bad practices, because if the dog is given too much too soon, he's not going to perform, which means you're most likely overcorrecting, because somebody who moves a dog too fast, it's you might assume that like maybe you also are assuming the dog isn't listening to you, so you're turning it up, or you're or you put the dog in a position to where that's just what it is now. Like the dog takes off after a squirrel, you really have no choice but to correct at that point. But the dog ain't going to listen because he just wasn't ready for all this freedom. And I love to give people this example of one of my dogs, that dogs are extremely aware of when the leash is on and when it's not, even if the e-collar is on. And an example being my personal dog, Simba, when I was teaching him e-collar, this was years ago now, I got him to the point before the e-collar came in, I would take him to the park, work 30 foot, downstays, and then recalls on a long leash and a prong collar. And I would walk all the way 30 feet. At the end of the leash, it's in my hand, Simba come, and he would do it perfectly, rep after rep. And then all I did to be different, put him down, walk away. The leash is in my hand. I just drop it. It's right there by my feet. I'm still 30 feet away. Simba come. Nothing. Simba come, Simba come, Simba come. I bend down to grab the leash, and I never get to it. I just bend down, and he jumps up and starts coming to me. And I'm like, okay. So a couple days later, collar. You're right. So a couple days later, the collar gets here. I put it on. Same thing. I drop the leash on the floor. Simba come. He doesn't move. I give him a little pop with the collar. He goes, whoa, and he gets up and runs to me. And you see this like immediacy in him, not because I hit him hard, because I didn't, but because it was like, how the hell? Like, what was that?
Right.
And so and I can see him looking at me like
what witchcraft is this?
Right. What sorcery is this? And like,
exactly.
What happened a couple days after that? I took him to the to the regular park, sorry, not the dog park, and took the leash off. We get there, took the leash off, and I was like, okay, Simba, lay down. And he was like, peace. And he was gone. And I was like, nope, Simba come, Simba come. I'm giving him a chance. I jump on my button, Simba come, boom. And I see him like slowly kind of turn around, head back to me. And then he's like, okay, what the hell? And he had this different understanding of like, how are you doing this? And I just pair that with like correcting in the crate, blah, blah, blah. And so definitely if you move your dog into off leash too fast, you can have issues like that. And I was lucky that my dog was conditioned pretty well, but as I've gotten better with my e-collar training, I've gotten even better at off leash conditioning in ways that are safe.
That's amazing. That's a great point that you bring around, man. Oh, I love that. This is actually a really good podcast. You guys ever thought about that? Has that thought gone through your head?
How many glasses in are you, bro?
I'm like four.
Okay.
4 glasses so far.
Let us move on.
Let's do it.
Let me ask you something, Shona. You touched on this a little bit in the beginning.
Okay.
Now that we've been able to reiterate a lot of this,
Okay.
over any other training tool, why use an e-collar?
Reliability.
Okay.
Yes, reliability. Like it's. Well, you said it. It's the consistent language. It's the consistency of the sensation. Meaning that the dog will respond the way that you have trained it to anywhere you need it to. I think that's my reason.
You know what's funny?
When a dog is wearing an e-collar and they have training in place, that's a reliable dog.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I use them. Yeah.
You know what's funny is for all, like we really, Brent and I, when we were kind of planning out, like getting the timing of tonight so that we can all get together for the podcast tonight, we really we like respect how humble and everything that you are, but we had no doubt that you know a lot more about e-collar than I think you do. Like, you totally deserve a seat at this table in this conversation, so to speak. And I think that
100%.
I was super happy about when we were kind of going through these points that we've been going through, from what people think to the science to good and bad practices and things, all of the different components to e-collar, like as I've kind of gone through and dissected, because I'm a nerd, so I'll sit and write things out with my blog and stuff like that. And it helps me think of all the different facets, because sometimes you sit and think in one little stint, and then tomorrow you're like, oh, I forgot this. How did I forget that? And I knew that you guys were gonna round out everything altogether. I think we've come up with a really clear understanding, and it's nice. I think it's good that you are a very competent e-collar trainer. And I just want to give the quick little shout out before we move on. WEHODOGTRAINER on Instagram, guys. Definitely make sure to check out her videos. They're very good. I've looked at them. They're super good. And I think that I think it's just a matter of just keep going, and your stuff's gonna blow up, no doubt.
Yeah.
But
keep doing your thing, girl.
I will.
I
plan on it.
So
get it.
With that said, Brent, why use an e-collar?
Are we doing the whole one word thing? Let's see.
Oh, you can do whatever you want.
I went for one word, so pressure's on.
Oh, that was good. You said reliability. Jeez, what's a good?
Also, I said pressure on was definitely a pun.
But like the other day where you were like, shockingly. Anyways,
I was like, it's shocking to me that not everyone has an e-collar.
You guys are being overly sensational.
Oh, you're just stop. All right. Use an e-collar. I'm gonna say, based on the way that I train, it definitely gives you an insurance, which is reliability, right? Like it gives you insurance. I don't recommend e-collar for all my clients, but definitely the dogs that I know will go after that squirrel, will go after that dog, will be impulsive because that is their nature. That's really insurance. It's a sense of security, that people can have. So I would say security.
Yeah, I think what I used to tell people was an off-leash trained dog will always behave better on or off a leash than an on-leash trained dog. And I think that what it comes down to me is just the culmination of my e-collar experience and just how it's been able to work wonders for dogs. Because not only we're talking like straight up obedience, but when we talk behavior mod, when we talk some more serious stuff, and dogs with like huge separation anxiety, tearing up crate type stuff, hurting themselves, breaking windows type stuff, there's a certain ease, a certain peace that comes with e-collar training. And I think that kind of plays down to just accountability. Dogs are just a little more aware, a little more of the time when you do e-collar training with them.
I agree, man. I agree.
That's
just real
a great
quick
point. I think. I was going to say, just like you mentioned, separation anxiety, and so I can't believe we didn't talk about it, but yeah, I think that's a whole episode in itself, as how e-collar can help with that. It's in the name, separation anxiety. So how else?
Well, there it is. We'll have Shona back for episode 16, a deeper look into separation anxiety.
We can let's totally do that. I want to go ahead and just shout out just a couple of popular e-collar brands. So one that we use commonly, and it's so funny because I realize they're the only one with a yellow round remote, right?
Yeah.
Everyone else has the boring type of remote. But let's go ahead and shout out to Educator, e-collar technology. E-collar Technologies, they're killing it right now. I think they're at the top of their game. However, we have to go ahead and shout out to some of the more traditional, the Sport Dog brand is really, really important. Dogtra is really, really important. One that is true and true with not just e-collar technology, but other types of electronics is Garmin.
Garmin
they make a fantastic bark collar.
Yeah, they have fantastic bark collars.
And GPS collars for hunting dogs.
Yep. Pet Safe. We have Pet Safe also. Pet Safe is a pretty reliable, trusted brand. Those are the main ones. Those are the ones that I would trust. Usually when it comes to e-collar technologies, you get what you pay for, right? So if you pay $30 for an e-collar, there's a reason for it, right?
You know what though? It's crazy because with e-collar technologies, you get more than what you pay for, because what really sold me on them, because Dogtra collars are very good collars, and they're comparable in their like functionality, I think, and they have even more levels, like more nuance. It goes to like 127 with the Dogtra, the 280, right? And so what really sold me on Educator, not to say the Dogtra doesn't, I just didn't necessarily experience it like to the same extent, but Educator's well, Educator's customer service is on point.
Oh my goodness, so good. They're so great. They'll just send you parts for free. It's amazing.
And
I'll be like, this $90 part broke, and in 2 days it was like sitting on my doorstep.
Boom. Isn't that great?
I was like, oh my gosh. I was impressed.
I love that too. I love anyone with good customer service who's a big name. Like, to be a big name and have good customer service, that sets you apart from the rest.
Absolutely.
Right? I love that. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening. Most importantly, I want to thank you so much for joining us, Shona. I think you added so much to this podcast, and I can't wait for people to get to know who you are and people to get to follow you on Instagram. You guys can go ahead and follow Shona on Instagram at WEHODOGTRAINER. Go ahead and follow me at CANISBEHAVIor. And go ahead and follow Mariano at UNTAMEDDOGCO. That's UNTAMEDDOGCO. Again, this is episode 15, a deeper look into e-collar training. Please like it, comment below. Go ahead and subscribe, whether you're on YouTube or whether you're on one of our podcast platforms. Go ahead and leave our comments. And if you guys have any questions, make sure that you guys email us at dogtrainerspodcast@gmail.com. And we look forward to seeing you guys for episode 16. Thank you again so much. Much love to everybody. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.